Okay, now the thing that we saw previously had something like this. So in our previous video we have seen that we have got an output like this. So the meaning of this output is quite evident when we look at the code. Now let me actually scroll it down, and I think you can see clearly that when I compare this with my code, my first Writeline method is printing out something. So it's printing out the value that's contained inside this text1 variable. So this is printing out this this sentence on the first line, and here so we have got this example is about escape sequences, and then we have got another write method. Now this time it's not Writeline. Now this Writeline method, what it does, it's going to take the code, as we have already seen, it's going to take the string perhaps inside this variable, and it's going to print that out on a new line. Now whenever we pass in something inside this Writeline method, it's going to print that code on a new line, and then it's going to move the pointer, or it's going to move the cursor in another line. So we see something like we see an empty empty new line in here. So this empty new line is being caused by this escape sequence that's actually telling the compiler to print out a new line before printing out the second text in here. So the second text is telling me it has a sentence something like this is the text2 printed on a new line. So the reason why we have another new line in here is that it's because of two things. Now the first thing is that this Writeline is taking the code and it's printing on a new line, and then it's telling the compiler that whatever you get after this sentence, whatever any new line or any new sentence you get after this first sentence, you need to print that out on another new line, not right beside me, just like this. I'll be explaining why that happened. Now that's why we see another new line after this first sentence. So this has something to do also with this and second sentence. So the reason why we have two lines in here is because of this Writeline first, and the second line that you see, this is the first line, so this one is being printed out on the first line. Then we have got an empty new line, then we have got another sentence which is actually this this text inside this write method. Now the first Writeline method that we have applied in here with the variable text1 is telling the compiler simply to print out the line, to print out the text on a new line, then move the pointer or move the cursor on another new line. So anything that we get after text1, or anything that we get after printing out the value inside the variable text1, will be printed out on a new line. Now the second thing is that this new line is if we remove this one in here, let me show you that. If we remove this part and let's save this, okay, let's get back to our command prompt. Let's actually recompile this. So I guess the file name was something like escape sequence. Okay, escape sequence 2.cs, and we have the compilation process completed. Now let's run the executable escape sequence 2.exe. Now you see the difference in between both of this output. Now the first output we had, it had something like an empty new line after the first Writeline method, but in the second instance we do not have that empty new line. That empty new line was caused due to that escape sequence of newline. Like, we placed another escape sequence that was telling the compiler to print out a new line. This escape sequence tells the compiler to print out a new line before this text is printed out. So whenever we get whenever we get this escape sequence, this new line escape sequence, and we get this Writeline method, that means we are going to get two consecutive new lines, one after the other. So the first Writeline is printing out the text1 value, the value that is stored inside the variable text1. Then in here you can see that it's printing out the value, and you can also see that in the previous executable that we ran earlier. Now inside when we removed the new line escape sequence, we see that this we see the second text, which is the sentence. This is the text2 printed on a new line. This text is being printed after the first sentence. So this Writeline method is printing out the value of text1 on a new line, and it's moving the pointer, or it's moving the cursor, or it's telling the compiler to print the second sentence on a new line, not right beside it. So we can actually tell the difference between the Writeline method and the write method by looking at the output. Now when you look at the output, you see something different in between this Writeline and write method. Okay, so although this second text, or this second sentence, is being printed out on a new line, but this time the compiler is not being told by the program, or the compiler is not being told by your program or your code to print the next line on a new line, which means after printing out this second sentence, the third sentence in here, this is the tab sequence, this is the tab escape sequence. The first letter is something and the second letter is something else. This third sentence is not being printed out on a new line, and you can actually see that both of this sentence, the second sentence and the third sentence, are being printed out on a single line. So we can actually tell the difference from here. So the difference is, when we use the Writeline method, it's going to print that sentence on a new line, and then it's going to tell the compiler that move the cursor onto another line, which means you print out any line after me on a new line, don't print anything else right beside me. But Writeline, the method which is called write in here on this program, you can see that this write does not tell that to the compiler. So whenever the compiler actually finishes of printing this sentence, it's not going to tell the compiler, I mean this program, when it actually finishes off printing out this second sentence, it's not telling the compiler to print the third sentence on a new line. It's actually telling the compiler to print the third sentence on the same line as it is. So this Writeline method is actually doing two jobs together. First, it's taking the when we look at this first Writeline method, it's taking the value, or it's retrieving the value from text1, and then it's printing that value on a new line. Then it's moving the pointer on a new line, on another new line, like this, and then it's after it finishes off moving the pointer or the cursor